Voertuigbestuur, wat doen u as u by die slaggate kom?
Господин Рогачев, когда вы видите яму на дороге, что вы делаете?
Я жму на газ, чтобы проскочить побыстрее.
Hej Reif in Herdan.
I assume you have a 4x4. Word daar ook rugby in Rusland gespeel?
Yeah, but it is being implemented, and we have quite a number of South African players, and I think coaches as well in Russia, who are in our Premier League, of course, and yes, so this process is on.
Absolutely. Good.
But we would welcome more assistance in this, because Russian society supported Boers in the war against the Brits. But later we have found ourselves on different sides of the barricades, so to speak. Again, it is very important to understand. It was not the war between Russians and the Boers. Let's not confuse interstate relationship and a relationship between the two peoples.
Absolutely.
It was the war of the socialist system against the former colonial system, and against apartheid regime. And it so happened that one of us was on one side and another one on the other side. But that shouldn't be transferred to, and should be allowed to spoil the relationship between the two peoples.
No, it's in Afrikaans and Russian. So
Russian, yes. There's no English.
Yes, there's no English.
And this is not a mistake. Very few people in South Africa know it. That the secondary school for girls called Rania in Bloemfontein, it was established and it was built and operated in early 20th century, 1902 to 1917, until the Great October Socialist Revolution. But it was built and operated on the funds allocated by the Russian Imperial Court. So we got rid of this, we got rid of the communist ideology, we got rid of communist system, and that was the major change politically from what used to be in the USSR. Democracy is just one of the formats, one of the forms of self-organization of a society. Who said that it's necessarily the best one?
Ons is hier by die Russiese Ambassade hier in Pretoria en ons gaan 'n onderhoud voer met die Russiese Ambassadeur. Ek sit nou hier so saam met Mnr Ilya Rogachev. Привет, Mr. Rogachev. Thanks for the opportunity.
Добро пожаловать. You're very welcome here.
Ons gaan in die begin net gou eers 'n snelvuurvraag afdeling het waar tydens ons iemand gaan vra wat hier in die Russiese ambassade werk om vir ons te help om die vertaling te doen, want ons wil dit baie graag vir julle wys die verskil tussen Afrikaans en Russies. En ons gaan met ander woorde die eerste paar vrae wat ons vir Mnr Rogachev gaan vra, gaan ons vir hom in Afrikaans vra en dit gaan vertaal word na hom in Russies toe. But before we continue with the questions, your personal questions that we have for you, Mr. Rogachev, is can you just give us a brief history of how did it happen? When did you start your career in politics? And yeah, a little bit more about yourself.
Thank you for asking. It's rather in diplomacy than in politics. I'm not there yet. So I began my diplomatic career in 1984, quite some time ago, just as I graduated from the Moscow State Institute of International Relations, just like many generations of Soviet and Russian and the diplomats from other countries.
But you also had a role in the United Nations?
I was posted twice to the Russian permanent mission to the United Nations, so I worked for the government.
Now, what does that what does that do? What do you do there? I know it's diplomacy, but what kind of work? I'm just curious because we Boers, we just want to find out whether you use a spade or are you just driving the bucket to let the crops grow?
Neither one. It's much worse. It's heavier. I covered some legal issues and other legal human rights and so on, social affairs. Both times I spent altogether 9 years there. You can hear my Bronx accent.
Mr. Rogachev, what we're going to do now is we're going to ask Polina to come and join us here. Okay. So, Polina, if you don't mind, if you can come and join us here. To our viewers, Polina Kulakova is absolutely proficient in Afrikaans. Nou kom ek sê dit net geweer in Afrikaans. Sy kan Afrikaans baie mooi praat. En Polina, jy kom uit Rusland uit. Jy's 'n Rus gebore en jy praat Afrikaans.
Ja, dis waarheid, maar my Afrikaans is nie so professioneel nie.
Nee, ons gaan nie daaroor
Maar
kla nie.
dankie.
Dit is baie mooi. Dit is ek gaan nie eers probeer om Russies te praat nie. Ek bedoel ek probeer groet in Russies, maar dit is vir my op hierdie stadium Grieks. Polina, Mr. Rogachev, I'm going to ask you the questions in Afrikaans now. You answer them in Russia, and we're going to use Polina here to do the translation for us. So hier is ons paar persoonlike Afrikaanse vrae wat ons aan meneer Rogachev gaan vra. As u in Suid-Afrika vakansie hou, watter plekke besoek u?
Несколько личных вопросов господину Рогачеву. И первый из них, когда вы отдыхаете в ЮАР, какие места вы посещаете?
Ну, обычно я отдыхаю дома. Больше, чаще всего.
Gewoonlijk is meneer Rogachev bij vakantie in Rusland. Не in Zuid-Afrika niet, maar...
Когда здесь, к сожалению, мало возможностей для того, чтобы заниматься туризмом. Хотелось бы иметь больше времени для этого.
Ongelukkig daar is niet genoeg tijd om vakantie te spenderen hier in Zuid-Afrika niet.
Ну, я, конечно, посещал и Западный Кейп, и Восточный Кейп, и Free State, Лимпопо, Мпумалангу. Так что я немножко здесь поездил.
Maar ik heb een moeilijkheid gehad om rondom Zuid-Afrika te reizen. En bijvoorbeeld was ik in Limpopo, in Mpumalanga, in Oos en Westkap.
Meneer Rogachev, en as u nou met die voertuig bestuur, wat doen u as u by die slaggate kom?
Господин Рогачев, когда вы видите яму на дороге, что вы делаете?
Я жму на газ, чтобы проскочить побыстрее.
Ga je rijden vinniger dan?
I assume you have a 4x4. Okay, hoe voel die gemiddelde Russiese burger oor Suid-Afrika as 'n vakansiebestemming en hoe bekostigbaar is dit vir hulle middelklas om hier te kan kom vakansie hou?
А насколько доступным является Южная Африка как направление для туризма для среднестатистического россиянина?
Доступно, в целом доступно. Но дело в том, что ЮАР имеет свою специфику как туристическое направление. Здесь неудобно путешествовать большими группами, как это принято во многих других случаях, по 40-50 человек вот этими огромными автобусами. Это скорее индивидуальный или туризм такой семейный, в небольших группах.
Dus bekostigbaar om Russische mensen Zuid-Afrika te gaan. Maar dit is een specifieke bestemming. Niet een grote groep gaan Zuid-Afrika toe als gewoonlijk. Dus niet richting of bestemming voor grote groepen van mensen, voor 40 of 50 mensen te gaan. Zo dus private toerisme of zoiets.
Family tourism, certainly. Ну и, конечно, самое большое неудобство – это как расплачиваться, чем платить, поскольку из-за санкций наши карты многие заблокированы, и возить с собой большое количество кэша, наличности неудобно.
Ja, die grootste kwestie is met die contant, met die geld. Dus niet gemakkelijk om hier te betalen. En Russische mensen moeten grote zaken met contanten krijgen.
Ek verstaan. Nou, kom ons vind net gou 'n bietjie uit. Hou u van jag of van visvang?
Давайте сменим тему разговора. Вы любите охоту или рыбалку?
Я люблю, но у меня не остается времени на них.
Ik geniet visvang en jacht, maar daar is geen tijd om dit te doen. Nie.
Ons sal moet vir hom help tyd maak. We'll have to make time to help you do a little bit more, especially of the one that we do most. Okay, wat 'n boek wat u gelees het? Boek of 'n fliek, né, wat u gelees of gekyk het jou geïnspireer en waarom?
Какая книга или фильм вас вдохновили когда-то?
Ну, это сложно сказать. Таких книг много и хороших фильмов немало. Я не могу назвать что-то одно. Вот. Ну, конечно, классическая русская литература прежде всего.
Dus een beetje moeilijk om één boek of één fliek te noemen. Daar is baie boeken en flieken dat ik kan en mag noemen. Maar om precies te wees, die klassieke Russische literatuur.
Sê vir hom, dis nou presies die tipiese antwoord van 'n ambassadeur.
Niet typische antwoord.
No, I'm joking. I said that's a typical answer of an ambassador. Mnr Rogachev. Het u al 'n besoek op 'n plaas by 'n boer in Suid-Afrika in die platteland afgelê en het u al 'n paar ure saam met hulle gekuier om 'n braaivleisvuur?
Господин Рогачев, вы когда-либо были на бурской ферме в сельской местности и посещали браи вместе с бурами?
Да, был несколько раз. Да.
Ja, meneer Rogachev
местах, да.
het sommige keer bij die braai bijgewoond met boeren ook.
En was hulle gasvry?
Они были дружелюбны по
Да.
отношению к вам.
Они были очень дружелюбны. И это, я нахожу, что это очень приятное времяпрепровождение.
Ja, hulle was baie gasvrij en dit is lekker tijd om te spenderen in Zuid-Afrika.
Мы в России тоже любим делать шашлыки. Это такая разновидность брая. И тоже общаться и сидеть у огня и так далее.
Ons geniet in Rusland ook braai of shashlik. Ons noemt het shashlik, niet braai niet. Ons geniet ook bij die vuur te zitten en gesels met mensen.
Ons noem dit, jy kan vir hom sê, ons noem dit ook die bostelevisie. Die vuur is vir ons ook 'n bostelevisie. So ons kyk nie televisie nie, maar ons sit ook rondom die vuur en kuier.
Мы называем это телевидение на природе, когда мы сидим вокруг огня и разговариваем друг с другом.
Ja. So, wat is die gunsteling sport?
А какой ваш любимый спорт?
Хоккей. Хоккей.
Хоккей. Is die gunsteling sport?
Ijshockey, yes.
Mnr Rogachev, nou goed, ons het nou nie ijshockey in Suid-Afrika nie, want Suid-Afrika is te warm. Ek dink ons ijs wat mense dit bane gaan smelt, maar ons speel rugby hierso. Het jy al 'n rugbywedstryd bygewoon?
Наверное, в ЮАР не так популярен хоккей, потому что лед растает. Но регби, в свою очередь, очень популярен. И были ли вы когда-либо на матче по регби?
Да, я был, смотрел. Я болел за южноафриканскую команду, которая обыграла французскую команду.
Ik heb de rugby-wedstrijd bijgewoond. En daar was speel tussen die Franse en die Zuid-Afrikaanse spannen. En ik was voor die Zuid-Afrikaanse span. En die Zuid-Afrikaanse span had gewonnen.
Dit klink vir my reg. Word daar ook rugby in Rusland gespeel?
Играет ли в регби в России?
В России играют в регби, но по популярности Я думаю, что этот вид спорта, он где-то в середине или, может быть, в конце второй десятки.
Ja, rugby wordt ook in Rusland gespeeld, maar het is niet zo populair niet. En misschien dus in die einde van top 10 sport in Rusland.
I think, Mr. Rogachev, that's also one of the reasons why we need to talk more to the Afrikaner and Boer people, because we will help you with rugby in Russia to become one of the most popular sports. Okay, that was just a side note.
Thank you very much for this idea. But it is being implemented, and we have quite a number of South African players, and I think coaches as well in Russia, who are in the our Premier League, of course, and yes, this process is on.
Absolutely, good.
But we would welcome more assistance in this.
We'll talk about it, definitely.
We need to get better.
Exactly. Ja. Wat is u gunsteling boerekos of gereg?
Какая ваша любимая африканерская еда или блюдо?
Ну, я мясной человек, мне очень нравится брай, вот все виды, кстати.
Ik is vleesman. Ik geniet al die vlees in Zuid-Afrika.
Dit is goed om te hoor.
Замечательно. Приятно слышать.
Nou, is daar enige ander interessante tradisies of gebruike in Suid-Afrika, maar spesifiek ten opsigte van ons boerekultuur, wat jou opval in vergelyking met wat julle in Rusland het?
Есть ли в африканерской, в особенности среде, в южноафриканской, традиции, обычаи, которые отличаются от российских?
Я каких-то таких впечатляющих различий не нашел.
Er is niet zo bij vergelijking tussen Russische en Afrikaanse cultuur.
Я думаю, что есть небольшие вещи, которые можно было бы перенять друг у друга. Ну, в частности, мы обратили внимание, что на себя вот здесь обращает внимание, это то, что почти во всех семьях стремятся иметь как можно больше детей. Это не тот случай, который вот сейчас, вот, не та культура, которая у нас процветает в Российской Федерации, в России в частности. Я думаю, что это очень правильно, и именно так и должно быть. И вот хотелось бы, чтобы вот это понимание, такой подход к созданию семьи, чтобы он возобладал и у нас тоже.
Daar is sommige tradities of gewonen dan dat Russische mensen kan ook krijgen. Bijvoorbeeld Afrikaners of Afrikaner of boerenfamilies krijgen meer kinderen dan Russische families. En ik denk dus iets wat recht is. En dus die rechte idee, de rechte beleid dat ons kan ook in ons realiteit implementeren.
Daar is een vraagie wat ek nou wil graag ekstra byvoeg, Polina, is. Ons het boeremusiek. Watse musiek het julle wat tradisioneel is, wat julle weet in Rusland het?
Дополнительный вопрос, который хотелось бы задать. Если в ЮАР есть традиционная африканерская музыка, есть ли в России, собственно, народная музыка?
Да, конечно. У нас и, собственно, народная музыка очень развита, и свои народные инструменты. И в разных частях России это разные инструменты и манеры исполнения, да, в том числе там и горловое пение на севере. И есть такой более современный вид, как русский романс, как романтичный romantic songs. И, конечно, очень значительная часть той музыки, которая считается классической музыкой, она написана, создана русскими композиторами.
Ja, daar is folkmuziek ook in Rusland. En verschillende delen van Rusland hebben verschillende volkmuziek. Bijvoorbeeld de noord van Rusland is beroemd met koor, met verschillende koren. En daar is ook de Russische romans of romantieke liedjes. En daar is ook die klassieke muziek. Dat is met verschillende Russische schrijvers geschept.
We saw a few of those cultural performances of the Russian music playspellen. I don't, songs. And I think, we really love that. I think that was very good music that we heard from the Russian music. So I would say I would want to translate some of those songs from Russia to Afrikaans. I think it would become good songs in South Africa, to be quite honest. Mr.
Only after office hours.
Exactly. Mr. Rogachev, I just want to talk to our viewers quickly. Soos julle kan sien is Russies en Afrikaans is 'n moeilike ding. Ek dink arme Polina het regtig waar sy moet mooi sit om alles te balanseer. Ek bedoel, ek sukkel so met Engels. Nou hoe op aarde moet ons nou nog van haar verwag om van Russies na Afrikaans te vertaal? Maar ons gaan net gou in die volgende stukkie wil ons bietjie praat oor ons taal, oor die Russiese taal en Afrikaanse taal. Want die feit is so dat as ons nie met mekaar kan kommunikeer nie, maak dit vir ons moeilik om ons verskille te kan bespreek en te kan debatteer. So, Mr. Rogachev, what we're saying is the fact that we have differences in our languages makes it difficult for us to debate issues. So if you and I have a problem, we rather decide not to discuss it because we stand away because we don't understand one another. I can't express myself in my language. So that's why we want to take this one closer to talk about language. How do you accommodate us with Afrikaans? And on our side, how can we learn Russian? Russian language. So because of the huge barriers that stands between our cultural groups and yours, so we want to make this communication more effectively. So one of the questions before you leave, we're almost there, then you can leave, Polina, is I want to ask you the number of letters in your alphabet. How many letters do you have in your alphabet?
33.
33?
I think, yes. Yeah, 33.
Nou, vir ons kykers, daar kan julle self sien, hulle het al klaar meer alfabetletters. Dit beteken daar gaan meer woorde kan gemaak word met hierdie alfabet. So,
and we made it easier during the last centuries. We got rid of a number of letters.
Is it? So you even got rid of
much more, yes.
Really? But I also see there's a 3 that is one of the letters, or is it just a flip E or what?
No, it's like a Z in English.
Like a Z?
Z, yes.
So it's a Z. What specific challenges or opportunities for language learning between Russian and Afrikaans speakers do you see when you engage in Afrikaans people?
Well, I don't see any unsurmountable problems on this path. I mean, in Russia, there are several places when one can study Afrikaans. It's somewhat more difficult for the Russian language in South Africa, unfortunately. But in Russia, there are at least 3 universities where one can study Afrikaans. It's on the Moscow State University, and within it there is an Institute of Asian and African Countries. It is located just opposite to the Kremlin, by the way, like 300 meters. So they usually have a group studying Afrikaans there. Then there is another traditional place, the one that I have graduated from, as I mentioned, Moscow State Institute of International Relations. And there is also in Kazan Federal University, there are short course of Afrikaans for students of the Institute of International Relations, History and Oriental Studies. So there are three places then where it is being taught. And да, Полина, расскажи им, пожалуйста, как ты учила африкаans?
Wil je mij antwoorden in Afrikaans of in
You can do it in English,
Engels?
yeah. Let's stick to English, Mark, so that at least Mr. Rogachev can understand it as well. Rogachev.
In Russia, as it was mentioned, there are 3 universities that give Afrikaans lessons, and these lessons are fully implemented in the program. So if you take the course, you study the language for 4 years during your bachelor studies, and then you can continue with your master studies, and all in all study the language for 6 years, as I did it myself. So we had classes 3 times per week in the university that is Moscow State Institute of International Relations. It was a second language after English. In the other university that was mentioned also, that is a famous one, Moscow State University, the students usually have classes even 6 times per week. So they have like a full understanding of the language of the country, not even the country, but the whole region of Southern Africa, because the students also have introduction into the history, geography, culture, and they manage to communicate with South Africans living in Russia, for example, from the South African embassy in Russia. So I would say the students have a good preparation before going to the country, but the professors that give lessons, they are Russian, and they themselves even managed to publish several books, dictionaries, and even the book of political translation has been released already, and you can study even without knowing English. You can study Afrikaans just from the scratch.
If you have to compare Russian with Afrikaans, how difficult would you say is it?
Oh.
Because for us it's very difficult, but for you, how difficult was it?
Personally, I believe that Afrikaans is a bit easier for us to study, especially if a person, for example, studied German or any other language from this group. So you can understand the structure, some words also. You can know them even without learning them specifically. The problem is probably the oral practice and listening, because we need more of that to master the language.
Is that why the students would come to South Africa for a period?
That is indeed the case.
Then you get friends here, and then those friends, you talk Afrikaans with them, and then you start WhatsApping one another with in Afrikaans.
Yeah, you can do like that.
Absolutely.
Probably.
But Polina, spasiba. Thank you very much for helping us here and do the translation today with this interview.
Baie dankie.
Mr. Rogachev, there's just one thing that I actually picked up about the Russian language, and it says that over a quarter of the world's scientific literature is published in Russian. Russian is also applied as a means of coding and storage of universal knowledge. 60 to 70% of all world information is published in English and Russian languages. And Russian is one of the 6 official languages of the United Nations. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. Yes. Well, I was not aware about the numbers that you have provided, but it is one of the 6 official languages. Yes, and many people outside Russia use it, especially in the former Soviet Union, of course, and the former Soviet republics, now independent states. and beyond, actually, as many people studied Russian and studied in Russia. And there are a lot of scientific exchanges and areas where Soviet scientists and Russian scientists are in the first ranks, and so the literature. Others are interested in having literature in regional language from Russian.
You talked about regional languages. I see here it says there's about 190 something ethnic groups, and then there are some 100 languages.
Yes.
So how does the languages differ between the Russian language differ between those? I read about 85 federal subjects. How do they differ throughout Russia? In terms of dialect and accents.
Well, it's not just dialects and accents, it's completely different languages, and there are places in Russia, like in the Caucasus, in Dagestan, for example, or in the Far East, where very small ethnoses, like comprising just several hundred people, speak a language that their neighbors do not understand even. There are historical reasons for that, in particular in the Caucasus, but people in one village do not understand the language of people in the neighboring village. This may often be the case. And the languages are pretty different. They belong to different families of languages. They are quite different. So it's not easy, but we are used to live like that because we've always lived like that. Mm-hmm. So somehow we manage.
But you do respect all the people with the different languages, with the different cultures in your...
Oh yes, yes, of course. And it is very important from different points of view, including from a purely scientific point of view. And there are programs, state-run programs, of preserving heritages and including languages of the small ethnoses. Unfortunately, in the last century, few languages, it's not that they disappear, I wanted to say that, but they are not spoken anymore. So we need to preserve at least the written, if there is a written language, we need to preserve this. And there are people and there are resources that are allocated to this goal, and as I said, this is a state policy.
One of the Afrikaans people that I spoke to is actually a radio commentator. He explained it the other day, very interesting to me. He said that language is like a bowl of water. So the water is your language. So the more you speak your language, the more the water becomes. And the more freedom you have to express and to be yourself, and that analogy stayed with me. To say that whenever people try to oppress one's language, you're actually taking out the water, and you actually let that fish or that person die in who he really is. But that was just a side note from the side. The last question on language is. I've tried to find some Afrikaans institutions on the internet that would allow us to learn in class Russian here in South Africa. Are you aware of any institutions in South Africa, or are they only online?
Unfortunately, I'm not aware, and there are none of institutions that would teach Russian in class, and it's only available online. So, but we are in working partnership with the St. Petersburg University and some other institutions in Russia, and we try to have as many online courses as possible. And we, with great satisfaction, note that there is a demand for studying Russian. Right now, there are about 1,500 students who are learning Russian online, and there will be more, certainly. And we accept applications twice per year, and the next intake will be in September 2024, this coming September. So, who is interested? There is an opportunity, there is a possibility to do that.
Okay.
But we're working on of course, on having it, having Russian language taught in class. We were hopeful.
I have to say, I found several guys that I didn't realize, on some of the groups that we are and people that are speaking to us that have actually indicated that they're busy with something like that on an online course. So we'll definitely have a look at that. Mr. Rogachev, now the more interesting part is we want to talk about a little bit of history and culture. We are sitting here, and I want to talk about the history and culture so that we can help our viewers understand both sides a little bit better. So sometimes we have to go back in the past to learn from our mistakes, and this is why I love history. History is something that you cannot change, but you can always learn from it. I think we are all, unfortunately, in that position. We can't do much about the history. We can only learn from it. And then I also want to quote one of our old presidents, or President Paul Kruger. He said, take out of the past what is good and bolt on it for the future. So that was my translation. So the Afrikaans people, if I translated it wrong, just put it in the comments there of the video and say if I was wrong or not, but you're welcome. So our history from our Boer and Afrikaner people started basically in 1652. Now, I just wanted to give this little bit of a background to our viewers. So we basically started in 1652, while the Russia's history started in the 9th century after Christ, in the medieval period. So basically, we are around for only 370 years, while Russia is around for 1,100 years. So that's why we're going now with my next question. So I don't want you to take us back all the way to the 9th century, but just give us a brief history or background, if you can, of especially the last 200 years, but with also specifically to understand, to make people understand how the Russian system worked. I mean, you had Tsardom, you did not, or is it similar to a monarchy? People don't understand that. They want to know, and so they ask questions. Were Russia also an imperial country? And did they have royals?
I would like, if you allow me, to go back a little bit to the beginning of your introduction to this part. When you said that history cannot be changed. Yes, it cannot be changed, but it can be rewritten. And this is something that we're witnessing now. The process is in full bloom, as there are different attempts, in particular to smear Russia's history, Russian state, Russian people, to rewrite history in many aspects, in particular making USSR equally responsible with Nazi Germany for the beginning of the Second World War, and making Stalin, equating him to Hitler in terms of responsibility for the beginning of the Second World War, and so on. And of course you can hear that allies, meaning Americans and the Brits and the French, won the Second World War, while 80% of Wehrmacht fought on the Eastern Front, that is against us, against USSR, as Russia is a continuing state, the continuing state, perhaps, I should say. And 85 of the losses that Wehrmacht suffered in the Second World War, it suffered on the Eastern Front. So the turning point of the Second World War, as you can hear, wasn't the Battle of Midway, but it was the Battle of Kursk, of Stalingrad, and other battles that were fought on the Eastern Front by the Germans. So this is just an example how it can be not changed, but rewritten. But for many people who do not know the real course of events, who are not aware of it, it can be changed, yes. And then you just can extrapolate why it is being done on modern times, and you will clearly see political reasons for doing that. But now to Russian history.
Yeah.
I will not go back to the 9th century. If somebody is interested, recently there was an absolutely breathtaking interview by our president, Mr. Putin, to Tucker Carlson. And the first half hour, it was dedicated exactly to the history. And that, of course, that wasn't just, by chance, but President did it in a premeditated manner to allow listeners, the audience, to better understand all the complexity and historical background of our relationship with modern Ukraine and Ukrainians. But for us, what is important, and you actually ask about the Tsardom of Russia and Russian Empire, and how did the system work? Well, Russia began in several feudal principalities. And I think the fourth capital was already a Moscow Principality that gained strength in early 15th century. And then it subordinated other principalities, and then acquired more territories. And eventually became an empire. Well, there is a date for this event. It is 1721, when Peter the Great, at that time known as Tsar Peter I, proclaimed himself emperor, responding to the appeal by members of Russia's Senate. And that the Senate proceeded from the fact that Russia won a very important war in its history that lasted from 1700 to 1721. We call it the Northern War, and that was against Sweden. And in the late 16th, 17th century, Sweden, imagine it, was the strongest, the biggest, the most aggressive state in Europe. It's not the Sweden that we know now. But and its Emperor Karl XII was one of the most successful military leaders of his time, perhaps the most successful, at least in Europe. So that war cost us a lot, and it meant a lot to the Russian society. And when we have won it, we reacquired historically Russian lands on the Baltic Sea. And we gained access to the Baltic Sea. That was important for developing trade in particular. So Peter the Great proclaimed himself emperor of all Russia. And that was basically, it was a formality in many ways. It didn't change really the way the country was governed. And Russians continued to call their ruler Tsar. So both names were used, both titles were.
So Tsar or
So Tsar or the Emperor or Tsar, yes.
Emperor, yeah, I'm with you. Emperor or Tsar. Nice.
So that was this event, this war that led to proclaiming empire. But in fact, the unification of Russian principalities, Russian lands, of Russians, I think that we cannot already use the term Eastern Slavic tribes. They were Russians by that time. It began 2 centuries prior to that. The Tsar, Moscow Tsar, Ivan IV, when he defeated the Khanate of Kazan, and then it was followed by Siberia's unification with Russia. And then there is, I would like to mention yet another war and another battle, and that was against the Golden Horde, the Mongol and Tatar entity, after they have subordinated separate Russian principalities, most of them actually. And for more than 200 years, most of Russians lived under the yoke of Mongol Tatars. But it was 1380 when Russians defeated Mongol Tatars in a battle on the so-called Kulikovo Pole. That was a very significant moment again in our history. When people from different principalities united, and one of the prominent Russian historians wrote that people from different principalities came to that field, stood there, fought there, and they were from Moscow, from Rostov, and from different cities, Vladimir, Tver, and others. So they came there like that, but they went back as Russians already. So that was a very prominent moment in our history, and when a nation, Russian nation, basically was formed. And I mean, if somebody needs a formal date, this is it for that moment.
You said the formal date 1380.
1380.
Yeah. Okay. So that could be that's what you said. That was the catalyst that formulated the Russian nation, or the start of the Russian nation.
It was like a capped already, the process. Yes,
I'm with you. Mm-hmm. But then after that, you know, the different cultures find themselves within the what you call it, the geopolitical movement in there. So of course there were different cultures in there, but did Russia also then try to expand through conquest and colonization to the western side? Well, there is nowadays there is a negative connotation to the word empire. I wanted to correct myself here. Yeah, back then, with the glasses that we use back then. And
of course, again, there is this anti-Russian interpretation of history, saying that Russia colonized so much lands and peoples. No, it was different, and the reasons that led, the circumstances that led to the establishing of the Russian state and Russian Empire in these borders, like a tremendous land mass.
Yeah.
sorry. They were particular and special. You see, I started talking about our war with the Swedes, but yes, Swedes attacked and took away some lands on the shore of Baltic Sea previously. Then we had to return that to get them back in this northern war. But there was also another very strong and dangerous neighbor of ours to the west, which was a Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth in 16th century, early 17th century. And they attacked also Russian principalities, divided at that time. And we also had this very difficult period in our history when Russian state was on the brink and could disappear, the so-called troubled times.
Yeah, when was the troubled times?
It was end of the 16th century and up to 1612. Everything ended by the end of the year 1612, and Romanov Dynasty began in 1613, and they ruled for more than 300 years in Russia. And the election of Tsar, of the first Tsar of Romanov Dynasty in 1613, basically put the end to the troubled times.
Is that Michael the First?
Yeah.
Michael the First.
Yes. And it was people's militia, basically, not the military, that were dispersed, that chased away Polish-Lithuanian interventionists, and the Polish henchmen sit in Kremlin for more than 2 years, actually. So again, the Russian state was in a very precarious situation, and people united, and it was people militia who fought this war and became victorious in it.
So can we say it's people who take charge of their own destiny?
Exactly.
Who took
Yes.
basically over
Yes,
there.
yes. That's what I wanted to say. But that was our very dangerous neighbor on the western side, who coveted permanently some Russian lands and even dreamed of having their king, Polish king, in Moscow, in Kremlin.
Yeah.
But in the south, there was also some danger. In particular, there was no border, because between us there were no man's land. But in Crimea, there were remnants of one of the branches of Mongol-Tatar invasion. People stayed there, the Crimean Tatars, who accepted Islam and were dependent upon Ottoman Empire. They paid tribute to Ottoman Empire, and they were directed in many cases by the Ottomans. And one of the places to pray for them were southern Russian principalities, and so they suffered a lot.
I see.
And in particular, Crimean Tatars used to simply catch people and then sell them on the slave markets in Istanbul or through Ottomans to Western Europe. So that was the danger in the south. In the east, though, it was the situation was quite different because these enormous lands were very sparsely populated, and peoples living there were subjugated, had been subjugated prior to that by the Golden Horde, and they wanted to get rid of the Mongolian rule at that time. So Siberia, which you can read in Western historical textbooks, was annexed and colonized and so on. It was basically liberated because the whole Siberia was, the Kazakhs went there with the detachment of just about 800 people.
Who were the Kazakhs?
We will get there. So that was not the state-run company. That was not state politics, but the Kazakhs, the free men basically, went there on their own, and they conquered with 800 men and 2 or 3 cannons the whole of Siberia, because people gladly, on many cases, well, they had some battles, but on many cases, people gladly accepted the protection that was guaranteed by the Moscow, by Tsars, or Russian Tsars from Moscow. So that was not a colonization like in Africa, for example, by the Europeans. And then, of course, there are these reasons, these political or perhaps even military reasons. So I told you that in the north, in the west, and in the south, Russians had pretty strong and aggressive entities who coveted Russian lands, in particular forests, resources that come from the forests, furs, etc.
I saw in the West, there's always commotion going on there on the western side. They were, it was kind of always this way and then that
Absolutely.
way. They pushed on that on the western side.
Yeah. Well, if you go even further back in history, then you could see that Slavic tribes used to live much more to the west and to the south than they were in the Middle Ages. But they were squeezed out by Germanic tribes, and so they had to go east. And then in the lands that are adjacent to the Black Sea, to Aral Sea, to the Caspian Sea, that was basically the corridor which was used for the many peoples, nomads from the east, to move to the west. During this period of the great migration of peoples. So the Slavs had to move to the north. This is how we got mixed with the Finnish-Ugrian tribes.
I'm with you.
But that's very far in history.
Yeah.
At that time, as I said, on the 3 sides we had pretty aggressive neighbors. And psychologically, it was necessary for the Russians to move, to expand, the lands under their control. So they moved to the north, to the east, and to the south to reach the natural borders. It was impossible already in the West, but in 3 other directions it was possible. And the idea was to protect the hardcore Russia, the principalities that were in the European part, what we now call European part of Russia, and to protect its people and to protect faith. That was very important.
Yeah.
So many parties, geographical parties, went to the north and then to the east and then to the south, and there were few wars fought in the south and on all sides, that was basically how empire appeared, because we needed to establish certain control over the lands in order to prevent further aggressions, which we didn't manage.
But I have to say, I see you did not only have male rulers in your list of emperors or tsars. I see Elizabeth, I see Anna, I see Catherine, and I see Catherine was after Peter the Great. So she did some.
Not.
When do they get the term the Great?
Actually, Catherine the Second. She was Catherine the Second.
Yeah.
Prior to her was Catherine the First. She actually contributed a lot to the development of the Russian state, Russian culture, Russian science, and this is why she was nicknamed Catherine the Great. But she is not Russian ethnically. She's princess from Schleswig-Holstein in Germany.
So basically from Germany,
yes.
Okay.
She was brought to marry a crown prince, and she after a chain of events she became Empress of Russia. But she made absolutely uncomparable contribution to the advancement of everything that is positive in Russia, and this is why she, I think she deserved this title.
That title. But very interesting for me to see, if I just go back to about the 1600s and I look at the list, I see there's about 7 of these rulers, let's call it rulers, emperors or tsars, that were deposed or assassinated. That's very interesting. It shows you that it was kind of like a tough battle to stay on the, let's call it, throne then.
Yes, that was absolutely in line with the mercies and traditions of in particular of Europe. I'm not talking about other parts of the world, but
I think
it's everywhere.
Yes, I did not check the other countries. I mean, I saw a lot of that as well on that side.
Yes, it was the same in Russia.
Yeah. So
a lot of infighting. Yes. A lot of infighting, not only between the rulers of or princes of different principalities, because many of them were brothers, siblings, or
now let's get
cousins and so on.
Let's get to that story. Let's get to that story because.
But yes, also infighting like real full-scale wars between principalities as well.
Now that story you told us in one of the meetings before, and I want you to tell us, our viewers, again about that one. About, I think it's Wilhelm II from Germany. He was the Chancellor, am I right, of Germany? Nicholas
Chancellor, yes.
Chancellor, and then Nicholas II was the Tsar from Russia, and then George V was the King of Britain. Now there was a period from 1910 till 1917 where all 3 of them were they were ruling their countries. Just tell us about those 3 cousins. What do you know about them, and anything else about their history?
Well, I do not know a lot, actually, especially I cannot tell you, like bringing in the 3rd cousin, the Wilhelm, but there is a very telling history of relationship between Nicholas II and George the Fifth, and
they kind of look alike if you look at them.
Absolutely. If you type in this a photo of these two, at least in Russian segment of internet, you will immediately have this picture, or several of them, when they are together, and they look like siblings, if not twins, not like cousins. And sometimes it's only the outfit. You can distinguish them only by the outfit. There is a projection of, that it's not only physical closeness, similarity, but they were relatively close, I think, in their personal relationship. And it has a projection on our history of relationship between the Russians and the Boers. Because when Paul Kruger asked Nicholas II to interfere and to protect the Boer states from the British colonizers, it was this relationship that prevented Nicholas II, the family ties that prevented him from entering this war, though all Russian society, including political class, was sympathetic with the Boers.
So is that the reason?
That's the reason.
But the other side,
as far as I know.
No, I hear what you say, and I think the other side was also, that's why Paul Kruger spoke to Nicholas II, because, hey, talk to your cousin and see, something about that. That's just speculation from my side. But that was interesting, because if their relationship was so good, I read somewhere that in 1917, when Nicholas II abdicated, George V did not want to give him protection in Britain.
Well, Nicholas II behaved in the Russian way, how he thought it was appropriate. So he refused to enter the war with the British Empire formally, but he said to the court, and that trickled down, that he wouldn't oppose volunteers going to assist the Boers, and that was used by many, and so. Well, this is a separate issue.
So Russia did not send officially soldiers here, but the volunteers could come. Okay.
Yes, the volunteers, and then the emperor, he funded from his own money the Red Cross team that came here and stayed in Newcastle in particular. And then 50-50 they funded with the King of the Netherlands another Red Cross hospital that also was deployed on the Boer side, but actually helped all the victims.
In total, how many of Russian volunteers were here to help in the Anglo-Boer War, the second one?
We do not know exactly, but certainly more than 220, 230, more than that, up to 270. This is what the latest researchers say.
But if you look at those medical groups or medical people that helped, I think it could have been even more.
It's more, yes. Yeah. It's more, yeah. It's just, we count people who fought. The guys that entered. So that was the behavior and the line and the policy on the Russian side in this. And then you're absolutely right. George V behaved in an appropriate manner in his own way, and when the emperor's family was in danger, they did not provide, the George V, the Brits did not provide them with shelter, and so they ended up being shot.
Or as they say, executed. Is
yes.
That the problem? But this is actually a very sad story, with the fact that the emperor and his whole family got executed. Am I right?
Yes. Most probably. There are the different, rumors
Is it?
about that, but who was shot, executed where, when, and if somebody survived. But no, there was official version that is corroborated by extensive research, saying that they all, unfortunately, died at that time, at that place in Ekaterinburg,
and the fingers point to Leon Trotsky.
Well, again, it's debatable who gave the exact order and how it was interpreted and implemented. Again, there are many details.
Before I talk about the Russian volunteers a little bit in depth, I just want to ask you something that we all have to hear and we all unfortunately have to talk through and understand, is Russia also had slavery, and people don't understand that completely. We all think that when we're born into a perfect world, but we have to look back at the past again and see that Russia also had slavery, and it was called serfdom, and it prevailed for a few centuries, I think 2 or 3 centuries. What is serfdom? And one thing that our viewers won't understand that right now, and I did not, is I don't know what is a serf and I don't know what is a peasant. Okay, we know what is a peasant in terms of the academic definition thereof, but what is a peasant and what is a serf? And serfdom.
I want to complement my answer to the previous question a little bit by stating that why Russian Empire, in what ways it was different from traditional empire, like in Western European colonial empires in particular. As well, there are several features to that, and that will help us to get to your actual question about serfdom. Russian Empire never gave any privileges to the core nation, to the Russians itself, and it never exploited the outskirts and the peoples living outside of this historically Russian lands. On the contrary, Russian Empire, just as USSR did actually, invested a lot in the development of its margins. And there was no inhumane treatment of indigenous population, as it often was the case with the European colonization, in particular in North America, and here in Africa, elsewhere. Russia properly got very little in return from this. So that gave reasons to historians to call it that the actually foundations for the Russian Empire were not economic, but it was somewhere in political and military and security area rather than anywhere else. And other peoples enjoyed protection by Moscow, by the mighty Russian army. And in particular, like Georgia joined Russia, they asked several times for the protectorate from Moscow. They do not like to remember it now, but it is the historical fact, because Georgia, being a Christian country, was menaced by Ottoman Empire on the one side and by the Persian Empire on the other side. So that was the reason for to conclude a certain treaty that made Georgia part of the Russian Empire. These vast lands that were acquired with time they, as I said, they were very sparsely populated, mostly, and the movement of people was very extensive in the Russian Empire. So economic reason, the economic need was to make peasants stay on the land where they were working on. And,
but they were connected to the land.
They were not, so
No.
they could move.
Okay.
They could move to the south, to southeast, east, and so on. And this is how Kazakhs appeared. Because with time, the crown, to which formerly all the lands belonged, gave it, rewarded with the lands, its gentry, and the gentry became they needed the workforce to work for them on their newly acquired lands, and the problem was to make peasants stay there. So it was in 1497 there was a Tsar's ordinance for the people to stay on their land, and they were allowed to change their place of living only for a 2-week period during the year. So at least one agricultural season they had to stay on the land where they were and to work on it, and they had to work for the gentry, and 1/10 of the crops they would have to give to the church. And with time, the landowners compelled them, made them work more and more and more, and pay more, and then to the 1/10 for the church remained. And so peasants tried to change a landowner, or the most entrepreneurial of them, more adventurous of them, would travel to the outskirts of the empire where there was no man's land, and they would settle there, and this is how different Kazakh areas appeared, and they got organized in the armies, as the military. They received the Freedom Charter from the Crown, which said basically that they are free people, with only one obligation, that in time of war, all the male population would come to serve with their horses, with their arms, as cavalry to the imperial army.
So the peasants kind of had an agreement with the army, so they must join the army in the war.
It's the Kazakhs.
The Kazakhs.
The Kazakhs, the free people. And the peasants protested, of course, against this personal dependence. It is a form of personal dependency. It is not slavery per se, as we know it from the ancient Rome, ancient Greece. But it is, of course, a personal dependency.
Let's call it limited rights.
Well, it's yes. It's more like servage in France, or villainship in England, and the conditions actually got worse and worse for the peasants, of course. And finally, there was just one day left when they could change landowner, and finally, after all, this day was also prohibited. It's cancelled. So they had to stay where they were, and they were tied to the land. If the land was sold, so de facto they were they. That was a
period of time. It happens.
This serfdom was cancelled in 1861. After it became very clear that this kind of economic relationship is outdated, it became like a brake on the economic development of Russia. It does not answer the necessities of the economic development of industrialization, first of all, of Russian Empire already at that time. And the event that showed that very graphically was the Crimean War of 1853 to 1856. That Russian Empire fought against Ottoman Empire, France, British Empire, and the Kingdom of Sardinia. And the war was lost, one of the few wars that we have lost. The lessons drawn were quite severe, just as the defeat. That the arms in the Russian army were obsolete, outdated.
So was
materially,
was the military
and the economic, yes, because there was no or very slow industrial development that was slowed down by the lack of workforce, because peasants could not move to the cities. There were no, they could not become working class because they had to stay on the land. So that was a major impediment. And Alexander II, known as the reformer in our history, in 1861, as I said, abolished this serfdom at all. And since then, the era of very rapid industrial growth in Russia has begun since 1860s.
But the serfs and the peasants after that period, could they then get private ownership, own their own property?
Well, they had their own property as well. Okay. Yes, there were communal lands that they would divide among themselves, and there were lands of landowner where they had to work in the interest of the landowner. And but the communal lands were there always.
So Russia was always a strong agrarian, agricultural group of people. They knew how to farm.
Yes. Because of the landmass, it was predominantly agricultural. But in the second half, or maybe even last year of the 19th century, a period of very rapid economic growth, industrializations started. And this is when Russia, very developed by that time standards country, with fast-growing economy and fast-growing population, actually. And if you project the tendencies of growth, the two that I've mentioned, to the future, then by the mid-20th century, we would have been a country with 500 million people and absolutely undisputedly number one economically. But then we had three revolutions. First, World War,
I saw that.
Civil War, Second World War, and so on.
And the Civil War is one that I kind of like, it takes from inside, eh?
Yes.
It takes one out from inside, so it stops your inside things. Mr. Rogachev, we're running out of time here, and I have so much to ask you. But there's some. I'm basically just going to jump here to a few topics. I just want to say to our viewers, we will not finish the complete interview. I will see if I can get another interview at a later stage with Mr. Rogachev. We want to talk about agriculture. We won't be able. There's some other topics we just wanted to touch on. Mr. Rogachev, we all are familiar with the fact that you have a president, which is Mr. Vladimir Putin, but you also have a prime minister.
Yes.
So how does that political structure work? Is it like, just give us more or less a quick lesson on that?
Well, our system, the prime minister is head of the executive.
Oh, okay.
President is somewhere, has more powers than just the head of the executive. It is like some kind of a mixture of French and American systems. So it's not, but in between, it's not the French case of president arbiter of the nation, but he is more than just head of the executive branch.
Of the executive branch. A difficult question that I want to put to you, you're welcome to answer it or not, is the reason why I'm asking you, these people that are blaming Mr. Putin that he's a dictator, does that system allow him to be a dictator or not?
No, not at all.
Not at all.
Not at all. I mean, it's for Russians, it's clear. I mean, it's like it's the continuation of the trend to call Lenin dictator, Stalin dictator, and all Russian Soviet states dictatorships, and so on and so forth. Now it's part of the smearing campaign. He's actually much more democratic than many Western rulers.
If you can just explain to our viewers that the USSR demolished in 1991, and after that you guys became also more democratic, or how does that work? If I say democratic, that's what I picked up in the research.
It depends upon what do you mean by democracy, because for many Russians it's a four-letter word now. And many other parts of the world as well. But in 91,
four-letter word, is it Russian four-letter or?
Well, it's for English-speaking, English expression,
Yeah. Okay.
Democracy is just one of the formats, one of the forms of self-organization of a society. Mm-hmm. Who said that it's necessarily the best one for everyone? May not be. In 1991, the USSR broke up, and how it was done, it's a separate story. It's a very long and very interesting legal case. So we got rid of this, we got rid of the communist ideology, we got rid of communist system, and that was the major change politically from what used to be in the USSR.
I just want to see the two parallels that happened with the National Party back then when we were moving over to, or the transformation started happening back then. The Afrikaner people also in 1994 had the Afrikaner Accord. I see you guys had the Belavezha Accords. That was part of the Ukraine and the Belarus, when the demolishing happened. So we also had this accord, and the accord basically said that we will not take, violent or revolt against the democratic election that's going to take place. So back then, that was signed with the Afrikaner group of people and the National Party and the ANC. However, the only outcome of that agreement was Article 235, the right to self-determination. And that's why we are still, we're still looking at self-determination as a minor group. When we go back to the fact that we talk about our culture and we talk about the volunteers, because that was the main subject for our interview, is I want to find out, or first of all, you had in your time, you said your starting point was, or where you can basically say you became a nation. So I think we also had those dates in our history as a cultural group, Boers and Afrikaners. And we had the Blood River, the Battle of Blood River. We had the first Majuba, Battle of Majuba, and then of course the second Boer War. But one or two that I want to highlight here is that in 1877 the British marched up to Pretoria, and they basically annexed Pretoria with about, I think, 25 men or so. And the Boers at that time just looked at them and said, "Are you serious?" I mean, I think Pretoria was only a few buildings. I don't think Pretoria was as big as it is now. But the bottom line, "Are you serious?" And they put up the flag there. And it took the Boers 3 years to work it out that, no, Britain, you are not serious about this. So they tried, within that 3 years period, they took the boat back to the Queen, or I think it was Queen Victoria still, and took the boat there and tried to negotiate themselves back the republics, the Transvaal Republic. But that one also ended up in 1880, where the Boers, where they started to tax the Boers, and then the Boers said, "No, we're not going to take these tax laws and things like that," and they came together at Krugersdorp, and they were 6,000 to 8,000 of them decided, no, we're going to stand up against against Britain. And a few battles happened, and then the last one was at Majuba, when they won the battle at the Mount Majuba. That was the first Boer War, Anglo-Boer War, and then it took us about almost 20 years when the second one started. But in that period, we know that a lot of other discoveries happened also after the minerals, and then of course we know that Britain also came again and tried to take that one. The second Boer War was the bad one, and I think that's the one that where the Russian volunteers also came to assist the Boers against the British, who really started making war. War is bad, but I mean, they've added an extra element of concentration camps, and that is an era, or is an event that actually caused a lot of trouble, a lot of pain in our history. So if we look back at that period in time. But the other thing that I want to say is that it was only the Boers and the Zulus on the African soil that I'm aware of, and it might be in other colonial countries as well, the Boers and the Zulus that won battles against the British and defeated them properly. And so the Boers were the second, the Zulus were actually the first. The Zulus in 1877 at the Battle of Isandlwana, they basically destroyed the whole army of the British there. And then thereafter it was the Boers in 1881. And then, of course, 1899, the second Anglo-Boer War started, and that one carried on for almost 3 years. I think some of the historians say that was a war not won by the British and not lost by the Boers. But the main thing is there was we signed an agreement on the 31st of May 1902, where we said that's the new peace agreement. But if we want to talk about the Russian volunteers, I just want to ask you from your side, where you said, what role did the Russian volunteers play in the Anglo-Boer War, and how significant do you think was their contribution from a Russian perspective, but also on the ground level? I read your book, and I must say to our viewers, it's actually interesting. There's a book called A Russian on Commando, and this book is actually a book that was written by a Russian that was here, and very interesting that this guy, he wrote it, I can't remember, in the 80s or in the 1900s, after that, and this was now translated to English. And the main thing about this guy in the book said to us that he did not, he wanted to, they did not come to tell the Boers how to fight, but to be quite honest, I think you guys knew better how to fight than us at that point in time. I think it was just a different environment, the terrain was different, and that's the only thing that basically was different between the people back then when they fought one another in this war. So what roles do you think did the Russian soldiers play in the Anglo-Boer War?
From the military point of view, I'm not sure that I can assess this. I'm in no position. But I can provide you with the context, and it is important, historically very important, I think, to understand better what are the relationship between our two peoples based on. Because Russian society supported Boers in the war against the Brits. But later we have found ourselves on different sides of the barricades, so to speak. And there is an explanation to this. It's a long story, though, that I can tell you if you have time.
Go for it.
Okay.
I have time. I don't want to waste your time.
It's not a waste. By no means, this is a waste of time. No, certainly not. I'm very glad I have a listener to this who can bring it to the others, because I think it is crucially important, actually. And many people do not understand this, do not know simply this. But again, since I have to go back in history somewhat, because after we defeated Russian army defeated Napoleon, and after the winter campaign, there was a surge, in national pride in the Russian Empire, also caused by the very fact that Russian army liberated many European countries that were conquered by Napoleon. And it was in March 1814, 210 years ago, that Russian, Prussian, and other troops marched into Paris, actually. So that was this nice date recently, just a few days ago. But Russians took pride in this, and there was a rise in these patriotic sentiments and, this heightened sense of justice, alongside sympathy towards oppressed people in different countries. And it went on for many years, and sort of became a tradition, a mentality of peoples of the Russian Empire, and later on in the USSR. First of all, I can refer to the sympathy that grew on the to other Slavic peoples, and also on the basis of religious connotation, religious ties, because there were many Christians suffering under the Ottoman yoke in Europe. And first I can refer to the Greek uprising in 1821 against Ottomans. That became like, an all-national project in Russia. And the assistance to the Greeks assumed different forms, from fundraising to receiving multiple refugees from the Ottoman Empire in the southern Russian territories. And to direct participation in hostilities in the ranks of the insurgents. But the key event leading to the independence of Greece actually was the Russian-Turkish War of 1828-29. And that was, all this was riding this wave of sympathy. But then you can take other events in the Balkans in 1875-76, which became like a milestone, like a true milestone in Russia's volunteer movement. And that was after Serbia and Bulgaria declared war on the Ottoman Empire. And that also caused a wave of solidarity in Russia. And lots of Russian volunteers went there. And that was the high wave of this volunteer movement in Russia, because in Serbia there were detachments that were not predominantly but almost exclusively Russian. And altogether the number of volunteers there, fighting volunteers, exceeded 7,000. At that time, in 75-76 war, the Ottoman Empire prevailed. But then this solidarity became part of the official foreign policy of the Russian Empire. In 1878, Russia declared war on Turkey, and that Ottoman Empire suffered a crushing defeat on that. And as a result, 3 states became independent. And that was Romania, Serbia, and Montenegro. And also part of Bulgaria received some autonomy within the Ottoman Empire as a result of this war. Or if you would like to take somewhat closer to South Africa, it was Abyssinia. In 1896, there was a Battle of Adwa, and that was a crucial engagement between the Ethiopians and Italian colonist army. That was the first Italo-Ethiopian war, and Africans prevailed, and they also had Russian volunteers fighting on their side against the Italians. And I can go on telling you different stories about that, like a Spanish Civil War, 1936-1939, when Soviet volunteers took part in the hostilities against the General Franco military that were supported by Nazi Germany and fascist Italy. And again, Republicans lost, unfortunately, at that time. But it was exactly the same with South Africa, with Anglo-Boer Wars. That Russians just felt that they couldn't stay aside. We say about ourselves that we live by heart. We should perhaps be more rational sometimes and follow the law. But this exaggerated sense of justice or injustice, it leads us sometimes rather far away from our homes. And
Absolutely.
This is what happened here, and it was actually not only the volunteers who fought, and you're right, maybe some of them were better in military sense, because they were professional military, a lot of them. They were discharged, like vacationing, like now. Sometimes we see the same phenomenon. Western military in Ukraine, in particularly, fighting on the side of Kiev regime. But there were also other forms of assistance, and we mentioned the two hospitals. But there is one particular thing that I would like to raise with you, because very few people in South Africa know it, that the secondary school for girls called Rania in Bloemfontein, it was established and it was built and operated in early 20th century, 1902 to 1917, until the Great October Socialist Revolution. But it was built and operated on the funds allocated by the Russian Imperial Court. Well, with the revolution, funding stopped, apparently, but that was the initiative for orphaned girls, orphaned and war families during the Second Anglo-Boer War.
I understand. Is that the Oranje Meisie School, the Oranje Girls School? Or?
Girls School.
Ja, the Girls School. All right. Baie interessant wat ons nou weer hoor van Mnr Rogachev. The other thing I want to say is, I just want to I have to finish off now, but I want to invite the viewers, ons kykers, om hierdie boek te gaan lees. Dit is 'n baie interessante boek, A Russian on Commando. And then there's another book that I want to show you guys, is also Boere and Russe. In this one is, is a few letters that was written, and it's a very colorful book, this one. It's in English, it's in Afrikaans and Russian. So
Russian, yes. There's no English.
Yes, there's no English.
And this is not a mistake.
Not a mistake. So there you have it. You read it. This one is Russian, and this one is, this side is English, Afrikaans. So you can read it. It's actually some letters that was written, and what happened to the Boer War, what happened in the Boer War, and afterwards the friendships that was established after that. Am I right? So,
yes, I think so. Yes, and this is just one of the elements that is reflecting this relationship. But let me get back to the modern times and say that the border war or the Bush War, again, it is very important to understand. It was not the war between Russians and the Boers. Let's not confuse interstate relationship and a relationship between the two peoples.
Absolutely.
It was the war of the socialist system against the former colonial system and against apartheid regime. And it so happened that one of us was on one side and another one on the other side. But that shouldn't be transferred to and should be allowed to spoil the relationship between the two peoples. We have, for example, the veterans of Angola Union, the people who fought there, and guess who their best friends are? It's the veterans of this former Buffalo Battalion, this number 61 battalion group. So let's not confuse this. Let's separate, as we say in Russian, kotlets on the one side, flies on the other. So please.
No, absolutely. I just want to. I have to ask this question: why did the National Party or the people back then call Russia the Rooi Gevaar? The Red Danger.
Well, I think that it is because there was this confrontation between two systems, socialist and capitalist, colonial and socialism. And in USSR, USSR was firmly on the side of the oppressed peoples, according to this ideology. And in particular, what was perhaps badly perceived in South African Union, that in 1960 it was by the initiative of the USSR and through the efforts of its diplomats that the declaration on granting independence to colonial peoples and countries adopted by the United Nations. And that was the beginning of the process of, politically and diplomatically, it was the beginning of the process of decolonization of Africa in particular. So yes, from that point of view, it was a threat to the then regime in South Africa.
Mr. Rogachev, I have so much more questions, and I want to say to our viewers, we want to talk about the multipolar system. We want to a little bit talk about how the world orders are busy changing, but we don't have time now. I definitely will see that we can have another thing, another interview where we can talk a little bit more that's closer or currently happening. Maybe if we get another time, Mr. Rogachev, then all these problems would have been solved, or we would have been wiped out of the earth. As some of these news outlets are actually portraying this whole thing, that we're entering a world war, that somebody just needs to press a button, then the whole world will be gone. So I'm not going to put you in that situation, but I want to say to you, thank you for the opportunity, and I hope that we can have another discussion. I think, to me, you've answered some of the difficult questions that was always kind of like a barrier, something in between us. I couldn't talk to you properly, and I think now we know one a little bit better. You can at least see that we, from our side, we just have our language, we have our culture, and we just want to be respected, but also we want to respect others for that. Thank you very much for that. I don't know if you want to have a last word for our viewers.
No, I would like just to thank you for this, for allowing me to express myself on certain issues that I felt also were important for this audience in particular. And come back soon. Let's have another round.
Ek sê vir die baie dankie.
Thank you. Спасибо.